My name is Kendreana, and I'm talking about my childhood and teenage trauma that I've experienced. I was abused by a family friend. I also was abused by a neighbor. We had a neighbor when I lived in New York. When I was 7 years old, we would go over to my neighbor's house, and they had a son. And it started off very friendly. We were just friends. We went to school together at some point, and it felt very family oriented. I am from the Caribbean, and so was my neighbor, so we had a very close cultural connection, and it just felt like extended family. I would often have sleepovers with him and his younger sister, and our parents were friends, and whenever I would go over there, I noticed that he was very sexual for his age, and he was very curious about things that I didn't understand. The earliest memory that I've had of him doing anything to me was probably the first time I ever slept over at his house, and he asked me if I've ever been naked before in front of someone, and that confused me quite a bit. I had never really heard that language. The second time I went over there, he asked me if I have ever taken off my clothes before in front of another guy. Mind you, we're only 7, so it was very weird that he knew about this, and weird that he was, telling me this stuff. So I ignored it. I never told my mom. I was a very shy, withdrawn kid. I didn't understand a lot of things, and in my mind, I would have gotten in trouble, so I just kept it to myself. There was another sleepover we had after that, and we were in the room by ourselves, and suddenly he turns off the TV and he tells me we're gonna play a game. And at this time, I'm just in shock, I guess, and I didn't know how to respond. So I just said, sure, let's play a game. I kind of knew it was going to be inappropriate. I had that feeling, but I went along with it. And as we're playing this game, the game requires him to lay on his back and be sleeping, and while his eyes were closed, I would have to take off my clothes. But secretly, he's peeking at me as I'm doing this, and of course, I don't know that. So he's on his back, his eyes are closed, and he's telling me, take off your shirt, take off your pants. And I remember being very hesitant about this and scared and worried about his mom walking in. So I'm hesitating, taking off my clothes, and he's pushing me, and he's like, you need to take off your clothes so we can play the game properly. I finally take off my pants, and I'm about to take off my shirt, and his mom walks through the door. His mom looks at us both, and she's like, what is going on here? Why are your pants off? Why is he on the ground with his eyes closed? And he tells his mom that it was my idea to play this game. Me being young and naive and shy, I took the blame, and he basically told his mom that I came up with this game where we would get naked or whatever, and his mom believed him. And I remember her pulling me out of the room, sitting me down and interrogating me and asking all of these questions and saying, where did you come up with this game, and who taught you how to take off your clothes like this in front of a guy, and where did these ideas come from? And I couldn't respond because obviously it wasn't my fault. I just remember him walking behind me like nothing was wrong, and brushing his teeth and going to bed, and just allowing me to take the blame. His mom did call my mom, and she did tell her about what happened. My mom was confused because she's never seen me behave like this before. And from that point on, my mom was always very wary about me going over there. However, she did let me go over again, and unfortunately he did try something else after that. We were in bed, it was another sleepover, and we were sharing like a big full-size queen size bed, and he wakes me up in the middle of the night. It's about 1 and 2 in the morning or so, and he asked me if I wanted to have sex with him, and I laid there frozen, and I was shocked, and I didn't know what that word meant. So I just said no, that doesn't feel comfortable for me. He went back to sleep. 5 minutes later, he's waking me up, he's shaking me, and he's telling me, I would like to have sex with you. At this point, I'm scared and I'm like, no, I'm not having sex with you. His mom hears us talking. She comes into the room, and this time I spill the beans and I'm like, he's waking me up and asking me if I would like to have sex with him. And his mom did believe me this time, and she removed him out of the room, and she asked him, did you do this to her the last time when we were taking off our clothes? And he did admit to it. So from that point on, my mom knew. She never allowed me back over there, and essentially we lost contact. I ended up moving to New Jersey some years later, so we never really saw each other after that until I was 16, where we had another incident. It made my trust very low. I remember that at that age, I started to look at trust very concretely, which was weird for such a young kid. I looked at people as untrustworthy, and I always had a fear of speaking up, which becomes a theme later on through my trauma story. I always felt like adults couldn't be trusted. I also looked at my mom a little differently too at the time, because I felt unprotected. I felt very vulnerable and that anyone could do this to me. There was another time where I was sexually abused, I guess you can say. This is a little bit after the situation. I'm gonna say 7 into 8 years old. When I was 7 going into 8 years old, I was sexually abused again, and this was by a family friend. I went over to his house, and we've known each other for many, many years. Our parents were best friends for over 20 years. His mom and my mom were best friends. They were close. She had a son who I kind of grew up with. I went over to his house often, and whenever I would go over there, the first memory I had of him ever being sexual was when he put on a movie, and in this movie there was a very explicit sex scene. And I remember turning away from it because it made me very uncomfortable. And he told me to look at the TV, and he kept telling me, look at the TV, every time I turned my head away. And it scared me, so I would just look at it, and I remember feeling so violated and disgusting, especially after going through what I had went through before. And he would just continuously put on movies that he knew were beyond my age. The second time that he abused me was when he would make me sit on his lap, and he would unzip his pants and he'd be exposed, and he'd make me sit on him. I didn't understand why at the time. I thought we were just being close and, just, I guess, comfortable with each other. And he would do this often. It became a routine where he would just unzip his pants, have me sit on his lap, and at some point it became more explicit and touching would be involved when I was on his lap. There were many times where he would pinch my breast as well. I would be standing next to him, and all of a sudden he would just grab and pinch my breast, and I remember it hurting so bad and me just crying. He's also made comments about touching me before. He would say things like, no one else is allowed to touch you except for me. It was very, very scary for me. I have 2 brothers, so him saying things like that to me and then going home to my brothers who were so loving and did not abuse me in that way, it made me feel very different than other kids, and I felt like I was put in a position that I shouldn't have been in, but I didn't fully comprehend it at the time. It just felt weird. There was another time in the kitchen where I was in there making food, and he comes from the living room and he's like, I want to show you something. So I come out of the kitchen, and when I walk out of the kitchen, his pants are unzipped and he's exposed his genitals to me, and he's looking at me and he's asking me, do you want to touch them? Is this something that you like? And I ran away and I was scared, and I remember saying to him, please stop, and I would cry and I would be like, can you stop this? I don't like this. And he would use it as a punishment if I ever did something that he didn't like, or if we would get into some sort of disagreement, maybe I took one of his toys or something, he would expose himself to me, and it became like a cruel game of his where, if I ever did something he felt was wrong, he would do something sexual towards me, and he knew it scared me. I would say this went on for about 2 years. I remember crying a lot whenever I would have to go over there because it was just a very isolating experience. My mom wasn't around, my brothers and sisters weren't around, and it was just me, him, and my mom's friend. It was like a different world. I didn't see much of him after the age of, I want to say 9, 10. Naturally, I guess the older I got, the less and he got as well. I forgot to mention he's a little older than me, sorry. The more older he got and the more older I got, I feel like we just naturally drifted apart, and then I moved out of New York, so we kind of lost contact. I was 7, he was about 12 years old. That went on for 2 years, I want to say. 7 to 9 was the strongest memory. I do feel like there were things that he's done to me before that age that I don't remember, which is scary for me. I only say this because of how strong he came on from what I remember. It just seems like he might have been doing things before. After these situations with these 2 individuals, when I was 8 years old, my sister moved back home. She was away for a while. My sister is much older than me. We have a 20-year age gap. My mom had me when she was 48 years old. My siblings are adults. So that in itself was a different world for me. I saw and experienced a lot of things that I felt like were way beyond my age, having adult siblings. My sister had a very traumatic life. She went through a lot of trauma, a lot of abusive relationships, things that are her personal story, not for me to share. She moved away from home for a while, and when I was 8, she came back, and my mom and my sister would argue a lot. My mom is a very headstrong woman, very, strong in her values, and can be a lot to deal with. My mom and I have had our own long history. My sister, she and my mom would bicker constantly, and the arguments would sometimes get very aggressive and violent. So my mom has multiple sclerosis, and she tends to get very stressed easy, and when she gets stressed, she can either pass out or she has very bad anxiety flare-ups that require hospitalization. And my sister and my mom were arguing so bad that day that my mom passed out in front of me when I was 8 years old, and my sister was just screaming and yelling at her while she's on the ground, passed out, to the point where I called the police because I was scared and I wasn't sure what would happen. I remember just feeling so sad, so incredibly down. And I think that was my first time I've ever experienced depression, is that day when I realized sadness was something that could be so deep. It felt like I moved from New York to New Jersey when I was 10 years old, and it was not a good transition for me at all. I came here from the city to a suburban area. It was a culture shock for me on many levels. We did not have a car when we first moved to the suburbs, so we would have to take the bus everywhere and walk. We were also going through really bad financial struggles, so it felt very isolating for me at 10 years old. I was not able to hang out. I made one friend and we became best friends all the way up until I was 20 years old, and she introduced me to a little friend group of mine that I had. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worst with that friend group as well. When I was 12, there was a new girl that started in our school in 7th grade, and me and her quickly became friends, but she was struggling with very bad depression, and she was self-harming, and she influenced me, unfortunately, to self-harm. She would show me her cuts and tell me that this was the best way to help with depression. I don't think she even understood what she was doing, but she would influence me to do it, and that was the first time I've ever self-harmed, was when I was 12 years old, and I did get a relief from it. It did feel very relieving for me. My mom had no idea. During this time in my life, my family was understanding me less and less. We were starting to get disconnected When I was 16 years old, I was experiencing so much depression that I decided that I was going to take my life. And I wrote a note the night before I had to go to school the next day. I gathered some things that I was going to give away to my friends to remember me by. I went to school the next day and I went through my school day. I came home and I took pills and I attempted to take my life. And my mom walked through the door. She saw that the pill bottle was there. She saw that I had a note and she called my sister. And I remember my sister yelling at me saying I was selfish and just kept repeating that I was selfish and how could I do this? And my mom was saying I was selfish, and I felt even more isolated after trying to take my life than I did before I tried to take my life. Therapy was helpful to a point. I feel like it helped a lot with the suicidal ideation and thoughts and wanting to take my life. I think that it helped with feeling less alone. Therapy provided me that safe space I was looking for from my family that I didn't get. So it did help a lot. When I did go to a new school after taking my life, I unfortunately ran into bad company there, and it re-triggered a lot of those depressive symptoms. I switched schools and I met a guy and we became friends, but after a while he started to be very sexually abusive towards me, and he would be very controlling of my time, my energy. He wouldn't allow me to talk to other people or make other friends besides him. He would force me to video chat with him and his friends, and they would also sexually harass me, and they would also be very controlling and abusive towards me, and it felt like I was the only girl in this group of guy friends, and I was unable to make other friends, and I had a very hard time getting away from this person. He would threaten me a lot and tell me that he would hit me or push me. He would try and force himself on me when we would ride the school bus together. He would threaten to rape me and would say really terrible things to me about how I needed him and that I wasn't allowed to be or talk to anyone else besides him. And I was finally able to get away from this person when he got kicked out of the high school that I was in because he hit another girl in the head with a rock. So he was removed from my life. So when I was 17, I met a friend, and she was like my only friend that I had my senior year, and we would spend a lot of time together, and she would introduce me to different guys outside of school when we would hang out. And one of the guys that she introduced me to ended up sexually assaulting me later on. We went to his house, and at first I thought he was not interested in me, and he found me on social media and we started talking. We would flirt here and there, and I noticed that he was more sexually experienced than I was. So from that point on, he would try and force himself on me, and he would try to get me to engage in oral sex with him. Eventually, I did give in, and this was the first time I've ever really willingly engaged with a guy sexually outside of abuse. I was a very naive 18-year-old. I didn't understand a lot of things about guys or dating. I had never ever been pursued before in that way. So when he asked me to engage with him in oral sex, I immediately just kind of gave in. Me and this guy had a sexual relationship for a year. He was very abusive towards me during this year. He would be violent towards me whenever we would engage in oral sex. There was one instance during the time that I've known him and we were engaging in a sexual relationship that he shoved my head down during oral sex so hard that I threw up and I was choking, and he just laughed and kept going. He never showed empathy. He would ignore my messages for days at a time until he wanted sex from me, oral sex from me. And when he would message me, it was very cold. He would call me weak and fat and make fun of me while still asking me for oral sex. I got really fed up with him one day, and I decided I was done with this relationship or whatever it was. And he became obsessive, and he started calling my phone over and over again and texting me. He had secretly recorded a video of me performing oral sex on him, and he was blackmailing me with this video. He eventually posted it on social media, and he told me that he would not take down this video until I saw him again. I was scared. I didn't know how else to deal with the issue. So I did meet up with him, and when I walked to his car and I got in, he grabbed me, he pulled me in the car, he locked it, and he trapped me in there for 2 hours. And during this time, he kept hitting my face over and over again, and he was shoving my head down on him and forcing me to perform oral sex on him. He was choking me, and he would refuse to let me out of his car until I pulled out some pepper spray that I had and threatened to pepper spray him. And that's when he finally drove me back to my house and told me to get out of the car. I went home, I cried, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to talk to anyone. At this point, my family was still very hard on me when it came to trauma. Anytime I would open up, they would just say it was being too sensitive. So I kept it inside. He continued to harass me. He was calling my phone still after that assault had happened, and he told me I needed to meet up with him again. If I did not meet up with him again, he threatened to rape me, and he told me he was going to come to my house and he was going to hurt me if I didn't meet up with him. And I did. He trapped me in his car again, and he did the same thing. He hit my face over and over again. My face was red and swollen, and he was choking me and telling me that he loved me while he was assaulting me. I got out his car finally after he let me go, and that's when I decided to finally tell my mom I had had enough of what he was doing. And my mom did listen. She took me to the police station. So we went to the police about what he did to me, and he did get punished for it. We went to court and we fought the case for a year. During the time that we were in court, he was still calling me and harassing me to the point where I had to get a TRO, a temporary restraining order, against him. During this time, he still contacted me even after the temporary restraining order. When I went back to court for the final time to kind of end the case is when the judge told him that if he contacted me again, the consequences would be worse than what he already was about to receive. So at that point, he stopped contacting me completely. Sometimes being by yourself is better than being around a lot of bad people. Don't be afraid to walk the path alone. I think that I had a fear of being isolated again, so I would surround myself around negative people. It's okay to just be by your lonesome and decide to make a life for yourself that feels good, even if people don't agree. Sometimes you have to be okay being disliked if that means saving your life and protecting your peace.